Hello, Nancy.
Hello, Natalie. It's so nice to see you.
You too. I love these chats we get to have once in a while. So, welcome to the What podcast. And I'd love for you to tell our audience a little bit about who you are, and then we'll jump into it.
Sure. Well, my name's Nancy Steinhauer. I've been an educator for the last 30 plus years. I just retired in June from 18 years as a principal.
Yeah.
I've worked in public schools and independent schools. Um, and I say I'm retired, but it's not entirely true. I'm kind of more self-employed. So I'm doing some coaching, I'm doing some consulting, and I just came back from 3 weeks in Brazil supporting teachers there. So that was really fun and exciting.
Wow.
What else should I tell you about myself? I learned about coaching because a student of yours was a mother at my school.
Yeah, that's
And
right. Hmm.
yeah, and I noticed that she was different. Something had happened. She was beaming. She was just kind of emitting light. So I said, "What's going on? What's happened?" And she said, "I've been training to be a coach." And so she connected the two of us, and you told me a little bit about the vision you have for coaching in schools. And at the time, you were piloting a project for teachers across Canada to learn coaching. And so I thought, well, I need to understand this better. So I invited two teachers from my school to join me, and the three of us joined the pilot project.
Yeah.
And I found it had a really huge impact on my own thinking about myself, about education. I started to use the coaching skills I was learning with staff, with students, with parents. And then I really enjoyed the process so much that I continued on and got my certification with
Yeah.
ICF to be a
Yeah.
coach.
Yeah.
So those are the basics. I was an elementary school principal. I won an award for being a principal. I've written a book on education across Canada. Um, and I really feel like education is the key to everything. That if
Mm.
we can create really positive experiences for human development for children and their families, schools can be protective factors in children's mental health, and they can prepare students, children, for a rapidly changing world to be humane and thoughtful citizens and change makers, actually. So, yeah, I get very excited talking about education, and I think my approach has always been pretty aligned with coaching, but coaching gave me some very specific skills that I could use better in my practice.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. I mean, you've reminded me of the journey. So, first of all, congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
And you've been very busy since, I can see. So you've had a lot of opportunities, and I do remember when we first met. I looked up your book and I bought your book. So you mentioned it in passing, but you're a published author. That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. I'm
Yeah.
actually working on a book project right now. We don't have a publisher yet, but the book project is about potentially about retired or experienced teachers talking to younger teachers about what they wish they'd known when they started
Oh,
out.
oh, that's such a good one.
Yeah,
That's
so that's exciting. I was just talking with the group this week, and you know, teaching is a very vulnerable profession because you're kind of alone in the classroom trying not to harm anyone and
mm,
trying to uplift your students and take them where they need to go. And it's a lot of people leave teaching fairly soon after starting because they haven't had the encouragement and the
mm.
mentoring that they need. So it's kind of an exciting. idea, this project too.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. The vulnerability of teaching. Not a lot of people talk about that. And I think it's a really important point to bring in because my work really stems from my experience as a kid, being in schools and feeling very vulnerable as a kid, right? Um, and oftentimes not feeling supported by a teacher, but at the same time, just that the whole vulnerability, I call it alien mode when my kids are in that space of like, the puberty and all these things. There's so many variables that you can't just say it's the teacher, right? But at the time, I think a child in that space is looking for an anchor,
Mm-hmm.
looking for someone to support. And so I guess my work with coaching and education came from wanting to create safer spaces or maybe more
Mm-hmm.
inclusive spaces. I'm not sure right now, but I do think that what you're saying about, what you were trying to create, and I'm curious as I say this, what what prompted your shift from public to private?
I started in private because when I graduated
Oh,
in
okay.
1993, there were no jobs in public. I could not get a job. And so I was really lucky that I got a job at a private girls' school, really wonderful school. So I started my career there, and then I went on an exchange to a private boys' school. That was fascinating, comparing genders. What's it like to teach just girls?
Yeah.
What's it like to teach just boys? Ended up staying there for a while, went on to a co-ed independent school that had an amazing special education program, and I had a real interest in special education. And it wasn't until actually, I think what happened was my father died.
Mm,
And and I had a child. So between those two things, suddenly I had this drive to move back into the public system. I hadn't been able to enter as a teacher, but I happened to apply just at a time where administrators were required. And I already had experience as an educational leader. I had my principal qualifications. I'd been a vice principal in for about 8 years by the time I applied. And so I ended up applying to a number of boards, but I got interviews and I got onto into the pool, as they call it, in two boards. And I ended up spending a year as a vice principal in York Region District School Board, which was a smaller board and really visionary in a lot of ways. And I was placed with an amazing principal who I'm still friends with, and she was an incredible mentor. And then I decided I really wanted to be in the public board that my child would be going to school in. And so I transferred to Toronto District School Board as a principal and was placed in an inner city school. So most of my experience had been in elite private schools and with, kids who came from the highest socioeconomic um,
yeah.
piece of the spectrum. And then I was placed in inner city Toronto in schools where the challenges that those children and their families were chasing were very significant in terms of housing, food, poverty, employment. And actually, I loved it. So I spent 2 years at my first school, made a lot of, I did a lot of good things, and I made a lot of rookie mistakes. And then I moved to a school that was closer to home, that was called a model school for inner cities. And so it was given extra money and resources so that we could really be a lighthouse school for schools for children who were in poverty. And so we got to really do exciting things, making the school the heart of the community and being innovative and really taking care of the whole child. And so we did things like we built a pediatric clinic. We
Wow.
brought in psychological support, kind of socio emotional support from JK to grade 8. We actually got a telepsychiatry portal put in our school. We worked with public health to do all kinds of programming for families. We had English as a second language programs for families. We had a parenting center. We had a daycare. We were like a full service community hub, and it was so exciting. And so that was great. And then I ended up working at the Ministry of Education and working with like 100 of schools, about 100 schools in Toronto, just helping teachers and principals and superintendents raise the achievement of students. Um, and then after that, what happened was I learned that this school that I absolutely adored needed a principal. It was an independent school. And I thought I have one school left in me. This could be so much fun. So I ended up switching back to independent just for the last 8 years of my career because I knew that anything would be possible there because it was small and well resourced and it's true. Everything was possible. It was a really great experience, including being able to take two of my faculty and engage in uh, a
Mm-hmm.
coaching course, which would have been out of our range if we'd been in public school.
Right. Yeah, that was really neat to have three of you in the program and be able to riff off each other and see how you're applying this in one school.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was a great pilot. It was my first time um, realizing actually through the pilot that the exercises that we were offering, the challenges in the program were actually being really well received by the kids. And
Yes.
that wasn't the intention in the beginning. It was more for your development as a coach. But then we saw that the application of those in the classroom was really powerful for kids. And it just reminded me of how they're sponges, eh? The
Hmm.
our little people are sponges.
It reminds me of in the in Rot at Rotman's, I did a course at Rotman's, which is at U of T, which is for like MBAs and executive leadership, that kind of thing. And they talked about the marshmallow task where, you give
Experiment.
adults 18 minutes experiment to create a, a tall structure out of spaghetti and
Oh, okay.
marshmallows. And I think I can't remember all the specifics, but the idea is that they tried this task with graduate students and then with increasingly younger people. And actually, the best people at this task were kindergarten students because the creativity hasn't been, you know, driven out of them by the expectations of school, society, etc. And I actually think that's true in general, that if we invest in our youngest learners and allow them to engage in the kinds of activities that we actually usually expect much older people to do, they approach it with such openness and such creativity. And kids are always way more thoughtful and perceptive than adults give them credit for. I think in a lot of ways, schools can infantilize children because if they focus too much on what they can't do, you lose sight of actually how brilliant they are. So I actually think in general, we can pull the kinds of skills that we teach in university and graduate school down to the elementary school level, and then they stick. Like then they become a way of being. Even things like listening skills and questioning skills, those are skills that we can teach children who are 9, 10, 11, 12, and then they have them for life. And I think that is why elementary education is so exciting because you can make these really big, impactful uh, moves that set children up to be really amazing adults.
Wow. Well, my slogan for the teachers coach program was always, not don't just graduate better students, graduate better people. Like
Hmm.
it's about making sure that we have leaders for tomorrow and all that. But I love what you're saying about the questioning at such a young age, and the listening skills that we could embed at a very young age. And I remember noticing the shift in my own kids. Like now they're 18 and 19, but I kind of remember to the day when my daughter went from expressive and uninhibited to closed and very conscious of impression
Hmm.
she's making, and other people's opinions, and before, the creativity, it's that, that statement by Nancy Klein, the mind that holds the problem holds the solution. I think
Hmm.
that when you talk about, when you were talking, I just kept thinking about all the creativity I saw in my kids at that age before they hit that I don't know what it was. It was this kind of threshold that they cross at one point where they're suddenly aware of public opinion. They're
Hmm.
suddenly aware of wanting to measure up where before they're not. And so that uninhibited thinking and creativity shows up. And I totally get that marshmallow experiment.
Yeah. And then the other thing is the goal setting. We at my last school, we would have children goal set from age 3 or 4, and then collect evidence of their learning in portfolios, from junior kindergarten on, and then there would be a moment in the year where they would explain their learning to their parents. And again, we talk about young children being capable and competent, but sometimes we don't treat them that way. But we can give them, especially orally, we can give them the tools to make decisions for themselves, to make change, to be the leaders of today, not just the leaders of
Mhm.
tomorrow. And
Mhm.
I don't mean to say that in a really heavy way, because it's not that I want to
Mhm.
burden children with all the problems that we've made for them. But I do think there's something to be said for them being able to identify a problem, either for them, a problem they perceive, and then understanding that they have agency to make a difference in their own lives and other people's lives, and that can happen at a very young age.
Yeah, maybe, when we often say the golden question in all of our meetings within the Coach Academy is, what problem are we trying to solve?
Hmm.
And I wonder if we pose that question to, early childhood education, what problem are we trying to solve? It would show us what the current goals of our educational systems are versus what the goals could be. If
Hmm.
the goal was more about developing agency and self-efficacy, and less about meeting certain, instructional guidelines. I don't know, like history, geography, what, I don't know what, but like there's a focus. And that was actually the barrier to, and I mean, continues to be one of the obstacles to cross in teacher as coach, is the budget for
Hmm.
this program in public schools,
Hmm.
private more affordable, I suppose, but and it comes down to, what are the goals of the system?
Hmm.
Because if the goal of the system is smarter, faster, better, then that's not going to serve, like the coaching program won't necessarily fit, because we're more focused on, because I think the result is smarter, faster, better, but the process isn't that, right? The
Right.
process is, takes time to cultivate, to stop and ask a question over telling people what to do, right?
Hmm.
To give people agency is to allow them to struggle a little,
Hmm.
you
And I
know?
think it's a model for school leadership too.
Mm.
It's interesting. I was just in Brazil supporting teachers, and in the first school that I went into, I decided, let's try this, let's try and do this as a coaching model. So I spent the first day meeting with the teachers I was supporting and finding out, you know, what they felt was going really, really well and what was a problem that they wanted to solve. And then that's what we worked on for the week that I was in that school. And then at the end of the week, we came back together and we kind of reviewed, well, how did it all go? And that was a really satisfying way of supporting those teachers, because we talk in education a lot about the right task at the right time for the right student. That we have in a class of 30, we've got such a range of skills and strengths and challenges and everybody's profile is different. And um, so we have to design the way we deliver curriculum in such a way that we're meeting everybody where they're at. And we're always making decisions about what's the most important thing for them to learn right now, given who they are, where they are, what they need to learn. It's actually a really complex, uh, endlessly interesting process. And it's not quite what people think it is, I think, if they're outside the classroom. But the nice thing about coaching is that it's a way of dealing with people individually and finding out, where are they in their own path towards self-realization, development as a teacher, development as a student, whatever it is. It provides a kind of a frame for meeting, you know, finding that right task at the right moment for the right person.
That was what drew me to the coach approach, was the individualized approach to education, knowing that you're in a classroom sometimes of 30 plus kids.
Yeah.
How do you still bring in that? And for me, it was about, it tied into self-evaluation. So if you give every child an opportunity to self-reflect and self-evaluate, you can you said meet the child where they are. That's
Hmm.
how I think you do that in a coach approach way. And then the other piece was modeling, like having teachers model questioning, open-ended inquiry, acknowledgments over recognition. I
Hmm.
see you, I hear you, versus you did a great job on that test. Helping them see the difference. And because when we use those skills, they learn them, right? And they
Absolutely.
start to apply them. So that modeling piece was a very big motivator as well.
And I think what you just said about acknowledgement versus evaluating, I think that's what you said, but I think that would that's really important. I mean, I think where kids start to close down is they're being constantly evaluated in school. And and what we know about, growth mindset, for example, is that kids do better when they can maintain a growth mindset or adopt a growth mindset. And they do better when we praise them based on effort as opposed to based on product. And a good effort will generally lead, like a good process will lead to a good product. So, Carol Dweck in her book about mindset talks a lot about how we do a disservice to kids by you know, constantly pointing out what they're doing right as opposed to how they're approaching something in a way that's going to lead to learning. So praising effort, um, noticing that they worked hard on something, noticing that they're persisting through a struggle, those kinds of things. When that happens, kids continue to learn as opposed to shutting down because they're worried they're going to stop being smart or stop being successful. So they're only going to start doing they're only going to do things that they know that they can succeed at. That's certainly a trap I fell into as a kid, is that when I got to university, there were so many risks I didn't take because I just felt I needed to do well, and that was my motivation.
Yeah, well, the language that stood out to me from Dweck's work was that when children know they can change, that's what the growth mindset is right? Believing that I'm not stuck in this, I didn't understand this concept, I'll never understand anything about math, right?
Hmm.
if they
Exactly. Yeah.
if they can believe that, okay, it's one concept and I'm going to get this and work through it, and I will, because I can change, I can grow that part of my brain that will understand
Hmm.
this, that the neuroplasticity. And I think that is easy to say, but like you said, it's hard to do in practice, because we do tend to say, great job, did well on that exam, but we don't really focus on the process that got them there.
That's
And
right.
yeah, and that process is the progress, it's the change, right? Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting because the one of the teachers who I did the course with you has, said, I think we need to put a system in place so that we could do some coaching at school. So we created some time in her schedule to work either one-on-one or with small groups to do some coaching. And she would always and we last year was the pilot year. Like we were just trying it out and then it's continued this year. But what she would do is she would give them some self-assessments really at the beginning of the coaching and then at the end of the coaching. And that was a way for both her and the child to see progress over time.
Mm,
And
mm.
a lot of it was not quantitative, it was qualitative, it was comments, it was other kinds of evidence, but it was pretty stunning how the children became, these are children who are 9, 10, 11 years old, became so much more self-aware and able to own a challenge they were having and then able to talk about how they were approaching the challenge and what they were trying out and what the results were. Um, so it would be great to have longitudinal data to
Oh
see if all that
yeah, I'm so happy to
sticks.
hear it's still going. That
It's
program's
still
still going.
going. Yeah.
I remember you had an incredible example that you brought. I think it was to class or maybe after a child you were coaching in school that had an interaction on the playground. Something about the way that that child processed through coaching. I don't know if you remember because I can't remember the details, but it was so good.
I do, and without revealing too much,
Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about it. This was a child who had come to our school from another school and had had a bullying experience, had been bullied by someone else, and was having some challenges connecting with other kids at school.
Mm.
And I was doing the course, so I asked the parents whether this child could could do some coaching with me. And the child was excited and the parents were excited. And so we would just meet. I think we met once a week during lunch or something. We would eat together and I would coach. And it didn't go on for that long, but maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 sessions. But what I found so interesting was the child started to talk about situations and would like grab props from my office, pencils and erasers or whatever, and would create a diagram of the situation using the props. And it became apparent pretty quickly that the child was thinking about the playground as a battlefield and that the
Yeah.
props were kind of a way for the child to show their strategy on this battlefield.
Mm.
And so what we really worked on was reframing the child's conception of the playground because really at our school it wasn't a battlefield. There were some conflicts sometimes and just the idea that conflict is a normal part of life and that we can learn to get through it was an important idea. But but this child was not on their own kind of in the trenches trying to survive anymore. And so we had to kind of work through that idea that this was a safe place and that there were people to help if there was a problem and that it wasn't this child's responsibility to fix everything without the help of the adults and the other children around them. So, yeah, that was a pretty profound experience. And this child had a remarkable mind. This was I think it was a grade 3 student, so like an 8-year old or a 9-year old, maybe an 8-year old,
Wow.
and was very bright and just saw things in metaphors. And I would never have understood them in the same way if we hadn't had that coaching process.
Well, the power of that metaphor, just that letting the child use those props to create what was going their perception.
Yes.
It's such a powerful thing. Like when we allow people to express themselves, especially listening for the metaphor, metaphors are the worldview, right? They reveal so much about our internal processing of information. So what a gift to have had that time with you.
And
Uh,
metaphors are so powerful too because they're so intuitive. And then when you try and kind of unpack them, You learn a lot about yourself too.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so much. Metaphors to me were the biggest discovery of my coaching career.
And I
Like
love
in my
them.
practice. Yeah. Yeah.
I was really lucky. My very first year as a teacher, the principal started the year by having us bring a symbol of, it was of the school, and I hadn't been at the school. So I brought, a symbol of what I thought the school was all about. And we kind of sat in a circle. I love circles. We sat in a circle and everybody talked about the symbol they had brought. And it was so revealing about how people perceived the culture of the school, the nature of their job.
Mm.
Um, so oftentimes I'll try and work metaphor into the work that I do as well, because I just think it's kind of like poetry. There's more packed in to a metaphor than there could be in any kind of just uh, expository kind of account of how something happens or what you're thinking about something.
Well, I can tell you the most powerful work that I've done with leaders is through imagery, like bringing in pictures and a variety of different pictures and, leaders working through their leadership style through the images.
Hmm.
It's so powerful. Like it goes so in depth because I think first of all, images help us, communicate things that we find hard to articulate.
Hmm.
These leaders would look at the images and they would get so involved in the imagery, like some person hanging on a cliff alone, or a group of animals, in one area of a field, and using that imagery to explain how they felt as a leader. I feel isolated and alone, or I feel very supported over here. That was so cool. And
Yeah. And
yeah.
that reminds me of, pretty close to the beginning of my career, I had this incredible experience. I did a year-long retreat called Women in Leadership, and it was women from different sectors meeting over 4 weekend retreats. Each
Mm.
season there was a retreat with a group called the Center for Emerging Leadership. And what I loved about it was it talked about women as leaders and um, kind of alternative conceptions of leadership that aren't always so sequential, goal, specific, that they're goals, but they aren't always linear, I guess. And I found that so powerful. And at the time, we created stories of our own leadership, and mine ended up being kind of a myth about an elephant. And anyways, it was just it really helped me understand that you could lead in a different way from the way that you had been led in the past. And I think that's true of teaching too. Many of us were taught in a way that wasn't necessarily inspirational or affirming. I was lucky. I had a handful of totally inspiring teachers. And so
Mm.
even as I started teaching, I was really trying to imitate for my students what my teachers had done for me. But this idea, and now I'm doing some consulting and coaching around educational leadership, and this idea that there isn't just one path to being a leader. There's not one way to do it, that you have to find I think almost anybody can be a leader if they choose to be, um, but they have to find their own authentic way of leading. And I find that all really exciting, that there are different pathways to the same end.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think that's the creativity of coaching, like that letting go and allowing people to be whole, capable, resourceful. When you really approach people with that curiosity,
Mhm.
they're yeah, it's a unique path for each person, right? So what's your plan now? You're consulting, you're coaching, like what is the vision for Nancy's future?
My vision is developing. I kind of think of this year as a year of experimentation. I'm seeing what calls to me and trying it out and figuring out whether I want to continue to do these things or not. So I have a few things on the go. I have this one thing where I'm working for a really cool group called Maple Bear Global Schools. And so they send retired teachers and principals overseas to support teachers and leaders in Canadian style schools. There are about 400 around the world. Most of the work's in Brazil because most of the schools are in Brazil. So that's why I just came back from Brazil. So
Okay.
that's new and exciting. I really enjoyed that. I've set up my own coaching and consulting business. So I'm working, it seems like my niche is teachers who are looking at taking on more leadership or people who are already educational leaders and want to be able to talk to someone who has that experience and knowledge. So I have a handful of clients right now, and I'm working with teachers and heads of schools or people kind of at the administrative level, but maybe not at the very top. So that's exciting. I'm doing some work, like some HR work for a tutoring company. I'm doing some consulting for schools that need some strategic help. And I'm also doing some curriculum writing for Maple Bear, where I'm trying to help reinvigorate a program where students get to work with each other across countries. So that's kind of exciting too. So I have a lot of things on the go.
You do. You do.
Plus, I'm working out 3 times a week and I'm going to compete in a
In what?
master's weightlifting competition. That's my goal.
None of those sound like retirement, by the way.
I know. I just got a text from my son today saying, retire already. But
Oh,
I don't think I'm ready to retire. I think I'm just ready to do something different.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I do like there is more space and more freedom, and I'm being very social, which is fun.
Yeah.
And I'm doing things like I went to the Toronto Film Festival during the day in September. I never could have done that before. And
Oh,
I'm
wow.
gonna go
Yeah.
away at the end of January. I never could have done that before. So things that I haven't
Right. The
been able to do.
school system holidays. Oh no. That's so good. You'll save
Yeah,
some money, I think.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So your book that you're working on, I'm curious to know, what is it that you would tell a teacher starting out today?
It's interesting because we just had a kind of a meeting, a strategic meeting, because, you know, um, books really in the beginning stages, but I had written a sample chapter just to help get people started. And what I ended up writing about was about relationships. And, um, you know, I do believe that all learning is rooted in relationship and that relationships also should be part of learning, that learning about relationships should be part of learning. But
Mm-hmm.
what I realized thinking back about my young teaching self is there were people I had an affinity for that I developed really strong, deep relationships with. I'm still friends with them. They've influenced me my whole adult life. But there were people I didn't have an affinity for that I did not work on those relationships. And as a principal, watching people come in and out of my schools, I was always so admiring of the teachers who nurtured the relationships, not just with the students and the parents, but with all of their colleagues. Because I really believe that whatever we're asking children to do, we have to be able to model ourselves.
Mm.
So a person who can find strength in everybody around them and can negotiate those relationships in a way that creates a collaborative, affirming, productive culture is someone who has a lot to teach us, I think. And so I think that's what I wish I had known at the time. There were people who were good at what they did, but very different from me. And I wish I had spent more time really learning from them because they had skills I didn't have. And what I did instead, because I was probably pretty insecure as a brand new teacher, not knowing what I was doing, is I looked for models of people who were a lot like me and had the same beliefs as me and had the same strengths as me. And that kind of affirmed, oh, yeah, you can do this, you can do this. And that was important too. But I think that being secure enough to say, yeah, I can do this really easily. And I also have to develop my skills in this other area. I might never be as good at it as person X, but I can still get better at it. Or I can collaborate with that person to make the situation better for those students who need that. All those kinds of nuances. Uh, I wish I'd understood better at the time, but I've learned it over 30 years.
Well, and it sounds like humility, which I have seen you demonstrate many, many times, just in observing you in groups and observing you with, like, people, teachers, colleagues. So humility is tough for a lot of people, though, especially when we're trying to prove ourselves, like as a new teacher coming in.
Yes.
What would you say is an important part of developing humility?
Well, I think it helps to feel secure, right? So if we can create safe environments for the people we work with, the people we supervise, the people, our children that we're teaching, all those things, then I think it's easier to be vulnerable. And I don't think you can be humble and not vulnerable at the same time. So I
Right.
think that what allowed me to recognize that I needed be to reach out to people who were different, um, who didn't mirror me, uh, was ultimately what like eventually a sense of being successful, but it's not enough. You can't be. I mean, the wonderful thing about teaching is you never master it. You never completely master it. You can become a master teacher, but you never totally master the job because everything changes all the time, including the children that you're working with and the dynamics of the particular group. So it's always problem solving, always, always, always. And and so I think that once I felt pretty secure that I could do this job and I could do it well, then I could be more open to the ways that I wasn't a master and continue to learn. It wasn't
Mm,
so desperate anymore that like I proved myself. Like I'd proven myself and now I just want to get better and better and better and better and better. And that's when you can kind of embrace a different way of doing things more
mm.
easily. I think that's my first
Well,
off the top of my
I'm
head
just
answer.
going to narrow in on the word safety, and I think that that's a really big part in any like corporate culture, school, classroom, home, family. Safety is a huge part of how we can step into vulnerability to grow, right? To try those things that we're not sure of. To
Yeah, and you know, we both know Dr. David Tranter from Lakehead University who talks about human development as opposed to academic development or social emotional
Mhm.
development, but the idea that when we're teaching, we're actually dealing with every aspect of the child's being. And he talks about safety to, not safety from. You know, the world's kind of a terrifying place. There's lots to be afraid of,
Yeah.
but we can create environments where we feel safe to take a risk.
Mm,
And that's, I think, when we can be more humble because we're not trying to prove to anybody how great we are.
absolutely. Well, I mean, I could talk to you for a long time, but
Oh,
I
well,
know
this
you
is
have a life
fun.
and you're very busy. So, so I guess a couple questions just to kind of bring us to the end. What would you tell people about coaching? What is somebody, a teacher or anyone just thinking about becoming a coach, becoming certified as a coach versus just calling yourself a coach? Like that's a big piece, right? The professional training, and the skills learned. What would you say?
Yeah. I think just like anybody could hang up a shingle to say, their life coach or whatever. Um, I think that undermines actually the impact of
Mm,
professional coaching. I think professional coaching is a very specific skill, and kind of like teaching, you probably never totally master it, but you can get better and better at it. And there's a framework that guides, and an ethics that guides the process, so that it's going to it's going to be a positive experience for anyone who engages in it. When I started taking on clients and actually having them pay for my services, I was really nervous because I was like, oh, what if I don't, what if I'm no good, or whatever, having all those self-doubts. But I kind of said to myself, I'm just going to trust in the process of coaching, because whenever I engage in being on the other side, being coached, it always takes me somewhere I wasn't expecting. It gives me insight into myself. It gives me insight into a situation. And all the answers were within me, but it took a skilled coach to ask the right questions that would reveal things that were below the surface. So I think it's a really valuable experience to learn to coach, but I think it should be done in a way that respects the discipline, and with, you know, I think that the discipline deserves respect.
mhm,
And then I think that almost anybody could benefit from coaching. It's not therapy. I think that therapy does something completely different, and you could be coached and be in therapy at the same time, and there would be two different things going on. But I think in terms of figuring out how to move forward and change things that aren't exactly the way you want them to be, I think coaching is really, really valuable. And I would recommend it to, I think it's a great way to just learn about yourself too. So I think it's worth doing. I think for any leader, it's a really good training.
mm,
I think for any teacher, it's a really good training. Um, but I also think anybody who wants to work with people in kind of a helping way, it's a great training. And anybody who's interested in understanding themselves better, I think it's a great training. I also found, like it helped me with my relationship with my son. It helped me with my relationship with my partner. It makes you more aware of how you're interacting with people, and um, how to be a really good and effective listener.
mm. Okay, we can hire you as our spokesperson. That was pretty well said. You
Thank
kind of
you.
captured everything.
Well,
Yeah.
you did an amazing job of teaching, Natalie. It was really it was a master class in teaching, being in your class.
Real wow, that's a huge compliment coming from you.
It was.
That's
And I like to
amazing.
say to people I know, because I'm a principal.
Yeah, 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 I know. That's what I'm saying. Coming from you, holy moly, I have to take that one. I have to sit with that. Well, I just want to say thank you for taking the time. I mean, I love these conversations, and I love the work you're doing out there. So keep doing it. And I can't wait to hear all the stories about it. And I
Thank
know you're
you.
connected into the community now, so I'm sure I'm going to see you around a lot. And
You are definitely. And thank you so much for the gift you gave me and in giving me these skills. I really appreciate it.
well, is there somewhere people can reach you if they want to maybe
Oh,
work?
yes. Okay. I'm on LinkedIn, Nancy Steinhauer, and I have a website,
Yeah.
www.nextstepsconsultingcoaching.com. I know it's not a great name. It's not catchy.
It's good. We'll put it in the description of
But
the podcast.
yeah, definitely look me up on LinkedIn or go to the website, and I'm always happy to connect with people who are doing interesting work.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Nancy. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. Have a great day.